Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be giving a talk on tips for presenting your research effectively. So as you said, I'm from the SNEC, and I'm also the professor in the National University of Singapore. Here are some pictures of SNEC, and we have a big research institute called the Singapore Eye Research Institute, or SERI. And we have more than 250 staff. So our founding director is Professor Arthur Lim. He was the first founding director, and he always aimed for excellence. My research interests are glaucoma, particularly angle closure glaucoma, and an angle closure glaucoma program at SERI. Anyway, for today's talk about presenting your research effectively, I think we have to talk about three areas related to this topic. Okay, so firstly is probably the most important one is how to frame your research question correctly. Okay. Secondly is some tips for how to write papers better. And thirdly is how to aim for higher impact journals. So let's start off with how to frame the right research question. Okay. And this one is a very important question. When I see a lot of presentations from your university, people do not give the reason why we're doing this study that you want to propose, okay? And so there are three questions that you have to do, okay? You have to make sure you spell it out. Most important question is why you want to do this research, okay? So this is to the forest from the tree analogy, okay? Why you want to do it? Is the research important? What are the gaps or unknown factors? And what is novel about what you're doing, okay? Then, of course, number two is what you want to do. Okay? And it means what you would do in terms of the methods and what answers you expect to obtain. Okay? And finally, how will it advance the field? Okay? How will it advance the area of research that you're working on? So these are very most important questions. If you don't remember anything else for this talk, just remember this slide here. Okay? And so, number one, why is your research important? You have to give a reason, okay? What is the impact on your patients, on your society, on cost, on timeliness of treatment? These are examples of why you're doing the study, okay? What are the gaps? Basically, what are things that are not known? So for this, you need to know the literature well. You need to know the trends, the current affairs, the current discoveries. And for attending conferences, for example, okay? And it's important to be, for example, trendy, okay? That means what is the hot topic? And that's important as well. So for example, I will give you right now, for example, artificial intelligence is one of the hot topics. Right? People are interested in AI, because AI is, because of computing power, people are interested in AI. Of course, being the first or being the newest is important. Okay, first to discover, first to report something, first to apply a new technology or research is also very important. Okay. Next, we want to what your project is going to do, what methods you're going to do. Okay. What are the things you're doing specifically, your aims? Particularly, you have to know what is achievable and also your hypothesis. Okay. What does it mean by hypothesis? Hypothesis means why you're doing it and what is your hunch or what is it that you expect, okay? And remember, the aims will address your hypothesis. So for example, okay, high cholesterol, your hypothesis high cholesterol is related to progression of diabetic retinopathy independent of blood sugar and BP. So this is your hypothesis. And so your aim is to determine the relationship between cholesterol and progression of diabetic retinopathy and whether this is independent of glucose and BP. So this is how you frame it. You have a hypothesis, and this is your aim. Okay. And remember my third part I mentioned to you. What is the impact beyond? What is the so what question? What your research would help, and what is the impact beyond your field? Okay. And so this is very important. Does it help you with the disease? Does it help you with patients? Does it help you with cost of treatment, etc.? This is very important to know what is the impact. And of course, when you do the study, you have to find the right mentor or people who can advise you on this research, okay? And of course, you may have to be persistent and be prepared for failure, because sometimes You may encounter difficulties. Not all research works out. Okay, and always remember to be clear and simple. You have to explain it simply in one paragraph or in one summary what your research is about. Okay, so we always talk about something called an elevator pitch. Okay, you're in an elevator and you have 5 minutes in the elevator, and somebody asks you, "Hey, what research are you doing?" In that 5 minutes, you must explain what your study is about and what you're doing and why you want to do it. So this is called an elevator pitch. Now I'll move on to the second topic, is how to make your publications, how to write your papers better. Okay, again, very important, because a lot of people, the first time they write a paper, they don't know how to write the paper. Okay, so for papers, in academic papers, right, there is a procedure or process. Okay, any paper you receive, you send to a journal. The journal will check first the formatting, and then they will check whether the paper is interesting, whether they want to send out for review or not. So it is a peer review process. That means in every paper you submit, 2 people or more will review the paper. Okay, so this is called a peer review. They will review the paper to see, and they'll give comments, and they'll give their so-called their assessment of the paper. Okay, then the reviews goes back to the editorial board, and then they will decide, should we publish this paper or not? If they are interested in it, then they will ask you to do revisions, and finally the decision comes back. So this is called the peer review process. Okay, and every paper has got the different sections of the paper. Okay, but what everybody looks at is, firstly, they look at the background or the introduction. They look at the aims of the study, the protocol, what was done, what were the outcome measures, what were the data results, how were this analyzed, how these inferences were made, and how the results were interpreted, and finally the conclusions. So these are, every paper undergoes the same kind of analysis. Okay. Now, what papers are accepted? Well, firstly, papers are accepted if they are a clinically important subject. Okay, if it's a new and original research, if it's relevant to the journal's readers, if it's well written, maybe it covers a topical subject. I told you something which is very topical, like I'll give you an example of artificial intelligence. Or it could be covers a neglected area which nobody has looked at before. Also, they want to see how likely this to be cited and what is the clinical importance. Okay. Now, there are different study designs, as you know, and the lowest or the poorest level of evidence is so-called a case report or case series. So you find an interesting case report, you write it up and report it, but that's a very low level evidence because it's just a one freak case. Okay? Then you have the case series where you have a bunch of patients who are found to have a certain disease or certain syndrome. Okay? The next level of evidence is a retrospective study. Then you do a retrospective study and you see what are the past findings of that particular patient or condition, or a case control study. This is the next level of evidence. Then comes cross-sectional studies where you do a one-time assessment, but this is a one-time assessment of a particular patient or disease. Then the high-level evidence are prospective studies or cohort studies where you follow a patient or a group of patients over time to see the outcome, and you study what are the different measures. Okay, and of course, the highest level of evidence becomes a randomized controlled trials, where you randomize patients to 2 different interventions. And then there's a systematic review and meta-analysis where you review a bunch of randomized controlled trials. So these are so-called different levels of evidence. Now, let me go down to how to write papers. And this is a very simple summary of how to write papers. Okay. Now, before you start writing a paper, you must have done some reading to know what is the field of research that you're doing. Okay, so for example, you're looking at diabetic retinopathy. You must go back and read up about diabetic retinopathy, know what are the different literature on it, and what are the knowledge gaps, then what people don't know, and what are the new questions that are important. Okay, and one tip is you read other papers related to this topic, and particularly to read the discussion or conclusions, read reviews or editorials, also read limitations of the paper. So most papers, they do research, they will write there, what are the study limitations and what else needs to be done. So this is a hint to you. These are things that you need to do. Okay, and that's why you need to know your literature well. Okay, and to get a background review, of course, apart from reading literature, you should talk to people, talk to experts, read review articles, read editorials, and also read original articles, particularly the introduction and the discussion. Okay. Then you write the paper itself. Okay, the paper has got different parts. Okay, you have first the beginning or the introduction. Now, the introduction is probably one of the most important part of the paper because people will get interested or they are bored just from reading your introduction. And usually, introduction, I recommend only 3 paragraphs. Okay. The first paragraph is you state the problem or the disease that you're working on, and what are the importance or clinical significance of the disease. For example, you talk about glaucoma, you will say major cause of blindness, affects 30 million people. This is the clinical significance. And then you state the uncertainty literature. Maybe glaucoma, we don't know the cause of glaucoma. So this is the uncertainty, or we don't know if blood pressure is related to glaucoma, or we don't know if this is related to this disease. So this is the uncertainty. Okay. In the second paragraph, you have to summarize what literatures that shows this uncertainty. So for example, if you say, what's the cause of glaucoma? We say, oh, there could be, this studies have shown it could be due to this cause, other studies have shown that cause. Okay. And what were the problems related to previous studies? What are the limited previous studies? So you link the problem with the literature, okay, the prior research. Okay. And from there, you then go to the third paragraph, which is then, because you've set the background, you are now why you're doing this study and what's the aim of your study. So this is very clear in 3 paragraphs. Any problem or any research can be summarized in these 3 paragraphs. Okay, remember, first paragraph, introduction of what disease you're studying and what's important about the disease, and what are the uncertainty in literature. And the second paragraph, we describe this uncertainty, what literature shows, and what are the conflicting results or what are the gaps, and so why you need to do your study. And finally, the third paragraph is the aims. Okay, so the aims is also very important. What is your study question, and what is the hypothesis? Remember, I told you about hypothesis followed by aims. Okay, so for example, what are the risk factors, what affects the outcome, etc. Okay, and write in a simple language, in the active voice. Okay, so the purpose of our study was, we conducted a review of, so it's in the active form rather than writing in the passive form. Okay, and then write simple sentences, and of course check your grammar. Okay, now remember, be clear and simple. Okay, now abstract is probably the next most important part of the paper, because the abstract is a summary of your study findings, and many people just read your abstract. Okay, so your abstract must capture the whole essence of the paper, and the whole conclusions must be strongly supported by the data in the abstract. Okay, so spend a lot of time on the abstract. Okay, remember I told you about the introduction. After the introduction, okay, you go to the methods and results. Okay, the methods and results are very straightforward. You have to write about the study design, what, who, when, and where. Okay, this is very simple. Okay, what was the study design, retrospective, prospective, etc. Who was studied, when was it done, and where, if necessary. If there were outcomes and exposures, how they were defined and how they were measured. Okay, and any other cofactors or covariates that may affect these outcomes or measures. Okay, so it's very straightforward in the methods. And finally, you have to write statistics. Okay, and of course, you must define any abbreviations used. Okay, Statistical data must also be written properly. What statistics was formed, what was the primary outcome measure, secondary outcome measure, what were the covariates, how many decimal places, what software you use for your statistics. Then comes results, okay? So usually in results, you give an overview of the data followed by specific data, okay? And always describe first, in the first part of it is the demographics of the patients, and then give the most important data of your study, okay? So you must always describe the data and describe the most important findings. And remember to do figures and tables when necessary rather than write long text, okay? And of course, if you put a table, you must say, this data was shown in table 1, okay? And then you must highlight, table 1 shows, you must write a sentence about the most important finding in the table. Remember, not everybody will just be able to interpret the data easily. So report the most important points of each figure or each table inside the results. Now we go to discussion, okay? And this is very simple. We have something called the 6 C's of discussion, okay? And the 6 C's, I'm going to go through them. Clarify, compare, consider, contribution, cons, and conclusion. So 6 paragraphs to write discussion, okay? I'll go through each of them. And of course, the references are very important. You have to put the right references. Now, figures and tables are worth 1,000 words, okay? Now, let me go back to your clarify. Okay, so the 6 C's, clarify, okay? The first paragraph of the discussion, clarify, means you summarize the main findings of your study. So clarify, okay? Paragraph 1. So for example, in this study, we found blah, 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 blah. So your main findings, okay? Paragraph 2, how does your study compare with other studies in the past? It means you compare, okay? Paragraph 3, you consider what are the reasons why you found what you found and why is it different from previous studies. Okay, so you write the reasons, consider. Okay. Paragraph 4 is contribution. What is new about your findings and how does it contribute to the literature? And then finally, paragraph 5 is the cons. That means the limitation of your study. And finally, paragraph 6 is conclusion, your main cycle. So this is a very standardized format for writing any papers, okay? And if you don't remember anything else, remember this point. These 6 C's, clarify, compare, consider, contribution, cons, and conclusion. Now, remember I told you about figures and tables? They are very important to put nice tables and nice figures because it's better than putting lots of text, okay? And finally, before you submit the paper, you must always read the paper and see, does it read well? Is it interesting? Are the sentence structures simple to read? Is the formatting correct? References accurate? And ask your friends to read it. Ask your colleagues to see if they understand it easily. If they understand it, especially somebody who is not in your area of research, let's say you write a paper on retina, you ask somebody who is in glaucoma to read it, and they understand it well, that's fantastic, okay? And ask yourself, if you were the editor, will you publish this paper? Okay. Now remember, you then submit the paper, and after that, you get a review back. Now again, before you get a paper accepted, you need to know how to respond to a review. Okay. Usually, you have lots of revisions, and just because it's a revision doesn't mean you will be automatically accepted. You have to really address each point. Okay. And you need to compose a rebuttal letter and address every single comment made by the editorial board member or the reviewers sequentially, okay? And write how you changed the manuscript, what changes you made, exactly what you did, and in fact, include 2 versions of the manuscript when you submit the revision. One is the manuscript with the changes highlighted or underlined, and the second one is the full final manuscript. So you have to write 2 versions of the manuscript, okay? And remember, it's a peer review process. You should try to comply with the request for every change and every comment, okay? Now, there are several scenarios when it comes to responding to reviews. The first scenario, of course, is the easiest, okay? The reviewer comments are easily accommodated. Fantastic, okay? Second scenario is they ask for more data, which can be provided. I mean, you can get the data, fantastic as well. The third scenario is the data is requested, more data requested, but you don't have that data available. And then, of course, you have this difficult comment, and then finally you have the disagreement, okay? And sometimes you have a very difficult review where the reviewers ask for too much work, okay? And you have not done this work. And so sometimes you need to almost beg the reviewer, hey, sorry, these are really good suggestions, but it's beyond the scope of this paper, and you will address it in future manuscripts. So remember, this is something you can write in the paper in discussions under future work or areas for future work, okay? Sometimes reviewers feel that you must save space and ask to delete tables or figures. Usually you can accommodate them easily, okay? And don't try to argue with them, but unless really you feel that they're really important, then you have to argue, okay? And sometimes you don't agree with the reviewer, okay? This is very difficult, but you can argue sometimes. But out of 10 points in the review, maybe you can argue only 1 point. Okay? You can't argue every single point and say, I don't agree with the reviewer. Okay? Then your paper will be rejected for sure. Okay, so clearly state why you do not agree with this reviewer comment, and so you have to justify why you don't want to make a change. Okay, remember, do not be emotional or derogatory in your rebuttal letter or be confrontational. It's a peer review process, so you must be friendly and always compliment the reviewer for the suggestions and then make the changes. Okay, remember, it's a peer review process, so you have to be accommodating. Okay. Now, if the paper unfortunately is rejected, okay, some people will try to do something called an appeal. Okay, now 90% of appeals usually fail. Okay, so I usually don't bother doing an appeal. You always can find another journal to submit the same paper. Okay, so don't bother doing appeals. Okay, unless there was a major error in the review process. So something the reviewer read something completely wrong or didn't understand what was written, then you can appeal. Okay, and sometimes if you appeal, you can write a letter to the editor to complain about it. Okay. Now remember, revisions are not done until its final acceptance is provided by the journal. Sometimes you may need to have 2 to 3 revisions to finally get the paper accepted. Okay, and most journals will give you a certain timeline for responses. And if you can't make it, you can always ask for extra time. Okay. And finally, after the paper is accepted, remember, you still have another method called the proofs. They will send you like a draft proofs to go through and check. And then sometimes there could be questions on the proofs. You have to make sure you also address these questions in the proofs before the paper is accepted. And I think every paper is publishable. You have to choose the appropriate journal, focus on your data, and improve your writing technique. Okay. And I read this article on insights from an editor at an important journal. They said they look very importantly at clarity, brevity, they mean not too long-winded, novelty, modesty as well in the story. So these are some points from some editors. So modesty means you don't overstate the claim. Don't make it seem like your study is the most important in the world. Yeah, so it's modesty. And of course, tell a story and what is the potential impact on patient care, how it will help patients. It's very important to make this point. Okay. And of course, the conclusions I told you earlier is very important to get the right conclusion. I'd like to acknowledge Professor Aung. Some of his slides are from here. So now let me go to the last part of my talk, is how to aim for higher impact journals. Okay, publishing in high impact journals. And one of the topics I would recommend, especially for those senior staff, is to focus on a particular area of interest. So let's say you're a retina specialist, okay? You should only be publishing papers related to your area of interest, okay? And this is what I mean by be a peak of excellence. You build an area of research that you are specialized in and not publish in every single topic under the sun. So this is called a jack of all trades. Okay, so this is one of the advice I will give you, is to focus on peak of excellence and to build a track record in a particular area. So let's say you are interested in AMD, you only publish on AMD. So people after a while will know you as an AMD researcher. Okay. And I already explained to you about why papers are accepted. Remember, something new is important, something a new special setting or new technologies. And I always give advice to some of my juniors: don't go for quantity, go for quality. So it's like salami slicing. Sometimes they do one study, they divide into 4 papers, okay? And they try to divide the different aspects of it. Now, sometimes if there's very complicated work, it took like many years, okay, I understand. It could be several papers, but most of the time, you should put it into one major paper and aim for quality, okay? Of course, be ambitious and aim for important topics. And if you're not sure how to improve your quality, always think and look outside your field, okay? Get help from scientists, from engineers, and collaborate with them to improve. Most of the time, most medical problems are not solved by the doctor, okay? They're solved in a multidisciplinary team working with people outside your field. Okay, for example, it could be your geneticists, your statisticians, epidemiologists, biologists, pathologists, engineers. These are the people who help you solve clinical or medical problems. But often the clinician is the key person asking the clinical question. Okay, in Singapore, we pair up usually scientists with clinicians. So we have a pairing system where the joint team of a scientist and a clinician will be able to answer the questions better. Okay, and this, for example, my group, I work with Professor Iranga Vitana and CC Kaur. They are both scientists and geneticists. We work very well together because I have the clinical question and they will help with the genetic or basic science input. And remember, importance of collaborations. Okay, you often need to collaborate outside your field. Sometimes to improve quality, sometimes to make it multidisciplinary, sometimes to increase sample size, and sometimes to have new insights. Okay, and I strongly believe in the strength of collaboration and friendship. Okay, so Helen Keller said, "Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much." Okay, an example of genetics program which I run at SERI. We do the Angle Closure Glaucoma Consortium for genetics. We have like 24 countries involved, okay? And one of the papers in 2016, we had 230 authors from 24 countries. We have an exfoliation consortium. We work with a group from a huge Japanese consortium. Many centers from Japan are involved in this consortium. And right now we have 36 countries involved, more than 15,000 cases, 100,000 controls. So this is the kind of international collaborations we set up, and these are different countries involved in this exfoliation consortium. There's many countries from every continent, from Asia, from Europe, Middle East, South America, Central America, and Africa. Okay, and here are some examples of different groups we've had over the years, been working together, and of course, lots of fun working with friends from around the world. Yeah, so the best collaboration I find are with friends and for people from different parts of the world. Yeah. And remember to share credit. For example, like this paper, as I told you before, we had 230 authors. Another paper of mine also in genetics, we had 280 authors. So it's a huge paper, but finally, everybody is part of the paper, okay? And remember, when you work with other people, don't insist on authorship position, don't demand lots of legal agreements, don't be too bossy, okay? And of course, for higher impact journals, beware of editorial standards. Beware of who are the people reading the paper, okay? And doing what other groups refuse to do, means going for the extra mile, okay? And so target the right journal. So if you're going for a basic science journal, for example, you should know the audience is mostly basic scientists. If you're going for a clinical journal, then you know the audience is mostly clinicians. So you have to write the paper according to the target audience. So this is the overview I gave you. Hopefully you find this useful about aiming for on improving your research presentation and your research dissemination. Thank you so much. So I'll welcome questions from anybody in the audience. Anybody?
Thank you so much, Prof. Tin. It's a very interesting thought and very important, I think, for not just the trainees, but also for lecturers alike. I'm interested in your part about writing up discussions, and you mentioned there's the 6 C's, right? So clarify, contribution, consider, and all that. What do you think about writing discussions based on findings? So you have like primary outcome, secondary outcome, and for each outcome or each result, you dedicate a paragraph for it. So comparing and considering and all that in one paragraph for one result of the study, and the subsequent paragraph will be the second result, the third result, and so on. What do you think about that?
I don't recommend. Usually, the results already have given the data. So the discussion is not to repeat the results. The discussion is just to like an overview of the results, and then you have to discuss your findings. Okay. So as I told you earlier, the 6 C's, right? The first paragraph, you put an overview of your main findings. Okay, and then just to clarify. Then after the next one you go is then you compare. Straight away you go to what are the differences you found versus other studies. And the third one is explain what are the reasons, what are the new things you found, etc. So this is much more, it flows better, it flows better, yeah. And then that way, you don't repeat the whole the results again, yeah. So this is what I usually recommend. And this way we write, the 3 paragraphs of the introduction and 6 paragraphs of the discussion. It's like almost like a foolproof way of writing a paper, okay? Almost a foolproof way. So if you all follow this exactly, and the method is also quite straightforward, right? So in the introduction, you go straight in the introduction part is what is it? Introduce the disease, why is it important, right? And the second one is what are the gaps you're trying to address? What is it that you're trying to address and why you're trying to do this study? And straight away, the third one is the aims. Yeah. So 3 paragraphs only in the introduction, not a long story, right? Because remember, a lot of people read the introduction and they want to see what they want to know of the introduction is why you're doing the study. That's the most important thing. Okay, why is the problem you're addressing and why you're doing the study? So that's the most important thing. And they don't want a long story because introduction is short. Right? Because a lot of people read the introduction after they say, I know what you're doing, and then they go straight to your conclusion to see, what you're finding, or somebody go straight to your abstract to see. Yeah, but they don't read the whole paper. Most of the people, they just skim through the paper, but they look at introduction. So introduction is to capture the attention of the reader. Yeah. And then of course the results you present the results. Then after the discussion. Discussion is basically what's the aim of discussion? The aim of discussion actually is to sell your paper, what you are contributing to the literature, or what you are something unique. If your paper is the same as everybody else, then nothing much that's interesting in the paper. Yeah? But if something new, something novel, then in the discussion it comes out. Why is this paper important? Yeah. So what is the difference? Why you found something different and what was unique? That's how the paper is interesting. Yeah. So, for especially people who are not so experienced, we recommend this straightforward 3 paragraph introduction and 6 C's in the discussion. If you follow this, any paper will be of a reasonable standard. Yeah. Yeah. So this is what I would recommend. Yeah. For any paper. So for people who are not experienced, you just follow. Yeah. It's like a formula.
The other challenge that I find, not just among trainees, but also among us lecturers, how do you find something not novel, but filling up the gaps? Many times we find ourselves repeating the studies already done by other people, and just tweak here and there to just make it a little bit different. But there are a lot of other areas to study on, but identifying the gap and making it as interesting and into a proper study is, I think, one of the challenge to
Correct.
What are your tips on that?
That's the problem. See, that's why I told you at the beginning. Is the question of, for example, why you're doing the study is the most important question, right? And if it's a Me Too study, then it's always not so interesting. Let's say 20 people have already done the study, and you just want to see what's your result because it's in Malaysia. Okay, this kind of study, maybe it's interesting for Malaysia, but it's not interesting generally internationally, right? Yeah. So it always has to be, you have to come up with an interesting hypothesis, yeah, or something interesting which nobody has looked at, or you have some hunch, you know what I mean? So that's how the literature it becomes interesting. The study becomes interesting, yeah. Or you have a big question which is nobody has tackled before, yeah. So these are, I would say, these are so-called, the interesting way of writing your research question. Yeah. So, for example, I would give. Let me share something like. Okay. So, for example, when I started my career, okay, I went for, did a PhD. So when I came back, okay, so I said, okay, I am interested in angle closure glaucoma. So this is my topic that I want to do, right? So I read all about angle closure glaucoma. I've studied, I read all the literature, etc. Right? So I know quite well about the literature, right? So then I said, okay, what are the areas I want to study? Okay, so I wrote down like the big questions, okay, for example, right? So this is one way you go by big questions. So one of the big questions I have is like, okay, number one, what is the genetic basis of angle closure glaucoma? So that's the number one question. So hypothesis is there, family history, people have family history of glaucoma, angle closure, very common. Okay, family history of angle closure glaucoma is very common, right? So I have a hypothesis, there is some genetic basis. So big question, what genetic basis of angle? Number two, big question I asked, can we screen better? Can we improve screening, right? Number three, okay, what are the risk factors for progression? Okay, who goes blind, angle closure? So these are a big question, right? Who goes blind, angle closure? It's a big question. We don't know who are the ones who go blind. So then you have to answer by looking at different questions, how many people go blind, what are the risk factors of blindness, etc. So it's become a big topic. Yeah. Each of these questions have many topics you can look at. So that's one way. Yeah. So you have you have several big topics. Yeah. So if let's say you are interested in AMD, okay, AMD could be the same thing, right? Okay, so AMD, what are the types of AMD is in your population? Could be one because it's something nobody knows not much about. Let's say Malay people, for example, right? Then after that, who are the ones who go blind in the Malay people, or what are the risk factors? Something like how can you examine better? Can you pick it up better? So these are questions that you relate. But of course, you have to know the literature well. Yeah. And so these are different ways. So if you know the literature, you know what's interesting. Yeah. And then of course you must have hypothesis. Yeah. Yeah. So these are some examples. Oh, by the way, I have to respond to you about the water drinking test. I've got a few people who want to collaborate. Yeah, I have to respond to you.
Great.
I'll send you an email after this. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Prof. That's great.
Okay. Anyway, so I hope these are useful. I can send you some slides on this topic. Yeah, but if you want more, I can give you more on the 6 C's if you want more on the 6 C's. You want that or?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah. So these are the topics for how to write a paper easily. Yeah. But I think overall, I wanted to share with you the question and then the research ideas. Yeah. And of course, then writing, of course, the next one is the how to write a paper. And the third one is aiming for higher impact journals because you all are interested in higher impact journals. Yeah. All right. Okay. So if there are no other questions, I'd like to thank you for your attention. And hopefully we'll meet up in Kuala Lumpur. Now it's opening up now. So I'm coming to maybe for APGC in August. Yeah.
We can probably, if you're free during that time, APGC, we can probably have a session with the trainees if that's all right with you.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Okay, I don't know. I heard from, is it going to be virtual or is it, I heard it's going to be hybrid and virtual or something. I don't know.
Hybrid, Prof.
Yeah. Okay.
I think Prof. One wanted to ask something.
Yes.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So this is in regard to our Part 3 exam goers who's going for their Viva soon. So is it important for those exam goers to know their examiners and the background of the examiners before going for Viva? What's your tip?
Viva. What Viva is it? This is the
For the Master
clinical.
of Ophthalmology Viva exam, they are going to the Part 3 exam involves presenting their research dissertation. So they're going for their Viva soon, maybe in a few weeks'
Oh,
time.
okay. So no
need.
get to know. No need.
Yeah.
No need.
So I think the concern about not knowing their examiner should not be, should not be a big thing for them.
No need. No need. Now, because Viva is usually based on your thesis, right? Based on thesis, yeah. So usually it's quite straightforward because thesis, or the work is already done, right? So it's better of asking questions related to the work they did. You know, sometimes they ask a little bit about the analysis, the methodology. Of course, the study limitations, yeah, and how if they have to do it again, what changes they would make. Yeah, these are quite standard for the Viva. Yeah, because the work is already done, right? So usually it's based on what's already in the thesis. Yeah, but of course they will ask about what the problems they encounter, what issues, etc. Yeah. So I don't think it's not a problem. Yeah. Okay, all right. If not, I got to go for another meeting. So thank you for your attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prof.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.